Ever had a rental wetsuit that felt like it was designed for contortionists with shorter limbs and no butt? Yeah, we've been there. Whether it's saggy in weird spots or squeezing you to no end, you know the struggle. I've rented, tested, and finally bought way too many wetsuits, and in this video, I'll give you the lowdown. We're going to break down the critical fit points that determine whether you'll be comfortable for 30 minutes or 90 minutes in a long dive. By the end, you'll know exactly how wetsuits work, how to evaluate rental suits, and how to make the best decisions possible in buying your own. And just to keep things clear, this video isn't sponsored. No logos, no sales pitch, just solid, timeless wetsuit advice using my own well-loved gear. I'm not proposing you buy the same gear I do. I'm trying to give you the information you need to make the best choices for your own situation. Let's dive in. Before you can confidently pick the right wetsuit, we need to talk about how they actually work, because it's not as obvious as you think. And honestly, it's quite interesting. Most people assume the thicker the suit, the warmer you are, right? Like putting on a winter coat for an ocean. But it's not quite that simple. Wetsuits don't heat you up like a heater. They help you hang on to the heat that your body is already producing. Wetsuits are made from squishy, spongy neoprene. When you jump into the water, the suit lets you in a thin layer of water between your skin and the neoprene, and that's why fit matters. Your body warms up that little blanket of water, and the neoprene traps it there, keeping the heat close, that warmer water. Your body doesn't need to spend infinite amount of energy heating up the entire ocean, because once the water is warm next to your skin, your body is happy. The challenge comes from how thick the permeable surface is. Thicker the neoprene is, the slower the exchange of cold water from the environment and from your warm water next to your skin is. So basically, if the warm water permeates out to the cold water slower. So the goal of any suit and how it manages your thermal regulation is slowing that loss of water next to your body and into the environment. Your body warms the water layer, and that neoprene traps it next to your skin, creating that thermal barrier. The warm water layer functions like a personal heated bath that contours your body. It moves with you, but stays trapped against your skin. And by the way, this is also why you might be cautious about peeing in your wetsuit, since it will stew in your suit for quite some time. It doesn't just release into the ocean, it's in that suit. If you do, make sure you flush a lot of water through the neck to get into the suit and hopefully create some water exchange. Now, if your suit fits well, the warm water layer stays put. But if it's too loose, cold water constantly flushes through, and suddenly your thermal regulation barrier feels like more of a leaky bucket. The neoprene itself provides insulation through its structure. Thousands of tiny closed-cell nitrogen bubbles embedded into the synthetic rubber. These gas-filled bubbles act like microscopic thermal barriers, slowing the heat transfer from your warm water layer to the cold ocean. And it's important to remember, your body functions and needs to be kept at 98 degrees approximately. So any water next to it that's less than 98 degrees, your body is going to have to put extra work into keeping it 98 degrees. It cannot drop below 98 degrees, because that's where you start worrying about hypothermia. But your body is really good at keeping itself warm, and it's going to try really hard, and it burns a lot of calories and energy doing that. So the easier you make it for it to stay warm, the more comfortable you'll be. And it's also worth noting that depth affects your insulation dramatically. As you descend, water pressure compresses these tiny neoprene bubbles, like tiny sponges being squeezed. Your 7mm wetsuit on the surface level might function more like 5mm down at 100 feet. Insulating properties decrease proportionally with depth. This explains why deeper dives feel colder even in identical water temperature. Not always, but sometimes. You'll also feel after you start your dive and you start descending a little bit, you start descending much faster. This is also another effect of that pressure compressing your neoprene. So thicker isn't always better as well. A well-fitted 5mm suit can keep you warmer than a baggy 7mm suit that allows constant water flushing in and out. Understanding this key concept completely changes how you should approach wetsuit selection. The priority isn't thickness or brand, it's finding a suit that creates and maintains a critical warm water layer while minimizing water exchange. And by the way, if you're enjoying this video, now's a great time to like and subscribe. I post weekly content to help divers grow their skills, build confidence, and explore the ocean with curiosity and care. And by the way, I started a monthly newsletter, so if you're wanting to know the latest and greatest on the scuba industry news, I try to cover everything that I can find across the internet and aggregate it for your information, and you can feel free to sign up for it in the description below. It's free. Now we understand how wetsuits do the magic. Let's talk about one of the most important things when it comes to actually staying warm: the fit. Most divers make critical mistake during their selection process. They try on a wetsuit, move around a little bit in the store, and buy it if it feels good. What they don't realize is that up to 70% of the wetsuit heat loss occurs in just 5 areas: the neck, wrists, ankles, lower back, and shoulder. When testing these critical areas, look for proper compression against your skin without discomfort. It should never be squeezing so hard you're uncomfortable, and definitely not squeezing anywhere that you feel like it's compressing and you're losing feeling in that area. You just want it comfortably around your skin. The neck seal deserves particular attention as the primary entry point for cold water. It should fit snugly, with only one finger being able to stick between the neoprene and your skin, approximately. Otherwise, you'll constantly be experiencing constant cold water flushing through your suit. It shouldn't be uncomfortably tight again, but you do want to pay very close attention to anywhere with bunched fabric, as that is where the cold water will collect. The same finger test applies to the wrist and the ankle seals. These connections need firm compression against your limbs without allowing multiple fingers underneath. So it's also important that these don't run long. You want these pressed against your skin, so if they're like running up to your fingers or they're running down to your feet or in some odd position, the problem is it could be bunching up with your dive shoes or other things, or your fingers on your wrist, and that allows cold water to flush in. Okay, now we talk about the lower back. It presents unique challenges since it's difficult to evaluate alone. Bend forward at the waist. If the material bunches or creates a gap, cold water will pool there during your dive, and it is going to settle like it's paying rent, drawing heat from your core. Wherever there's a gap anywhere in your suit, that's where cold water can pull, and more water means also your body has to work harder to warm all that water as well. For shoulders and armpits, you face a trade-off between mobility and insulation. Reach across your chest and above your head. The suit should move with you without creating large gaps and becoming very uncomfortable or restricting mobility. The goal is to move around into normal posture positions that you'll be diving with and see how the material bunches. You can also grab the layer underneath your armpit. There's always going to be something there, but you kind of want to see how much. It shouldn't be too much. The more, the harder your body will have to warm all that water. And a quick note to the ladies that some brands have suits specifically cut for women. So you don't have to be afraid to try both men and women's version. The right one is the one that fits your shape the best, not what the tag says. Now, while you're trying your suits on, pay extra attention to the zippers. Most wetsuits come with a back zipper and a pull cord so you can zip yourself up like a superhero. I feel this is a very important feature, as I like to be able to suit myself and be self-reliable. So take note how robust this cord is. I've seen a lot of wetsuits bust this off, and just look at how strong this zipper is going to be, because it's a failure point, and this is going to be the lifespan of your suit. If anything breaks, it's usually somewhere along the zipper. These cords do snap eventually, and some are faster than others. Plus, sticker wetsuits can be a bit more challenging to self-zip. When in doubt, ask a buddy to help you zip up. It's not worth forcing something and breaking your zipper. Also, an additional feature that I find nice to have is the zippers on the ankles and possibly the wrists as well, because you can put them over your booties. And I do advise putting your wetsuit over your booties, because if you put them under, you'll find that your booties just are filled with water after your dive. So put them over so water drains out when you're standing out of the water. The wrists are optional, but it is nice to have, especially being able to just zip it up towards the end and stay comfortable, and zip it up right before you dive. And particularly, they're nice if you're wearing gloves of any kind. So this tends to be a little bit more important for thicker wetsuits, where you're probably going to be wearing gloves because you don't want your hands to be cold as well. And the zippers on the wrists and the ankles make getting the suit on and off so much easier as well. Try the zippers out and see how they feel once zipped. And by the way, some thicker semi-dry wetsuits tend to have a back entry zipper, meaning you enter through the back and the zipper kind of stretches across your back. Here, I don't own one myself, but there are front entry variants too, which arguably are easier to self-zip and either run up and down or diagonally here. I don't own one myself, and I will say they tend to be less common. It really comes down to personal preference. One problem of back entry zippers is often you can't zip it up yourself, or you're really talented if you're able to do it. So it kind of blows the self-reliance out of the water. But that's okay if you have a dedicated dive buddy. Either way, the most common zipper type is going to be this back entry zipper for wetsuit. You just find a little bit more variance when you start getting into the thicker wetsuits like semi-dries, which we'll talk more about shortly. Also worth taking a moment to take notice of any reinforced areas with extra padding on the wetsuit. Not all of them have them, like this one has no reinforced areas. And in fact, I just checked all my wetsuits and none of them have them. But if you are gonna have padding on your wetsuit, it's nice to have them on the knees. You may also see padding on the shoulders, elbows, and the cuffs that need to be more prone to rubbing against gear or things on your dive. It helps reinforce the wetsuit in specific area. But generally, as I mentioned, I just checked all of mine and they don't have reinforced areas, so it's not necessary either. One thing that might be nice is if you're a beginner and getting your first wetsuit, you're gonna have a little shaky buoyancy control, and so maybe you're bumping into more things, and that would be a feature that's more beneficial to a newer diver. Eventually, when you have stronger buoyancy control, this feature is going to matter less, because you really should have better control and be bumping into things much less. But again, that feature adds a little bit extra protection, but shouldn't be necessary. It's especially nice for newer divers. And one additional feature is built-in pockets. Pockets reachable on the side of your legs that have a D-ring inside that you can clip things with a single or double ender from your gear and clip them onto those D-rings. Because last thing you want to do is try and pull something out of that pocket and everything else falls out. I mean, it's okay if it's falling out if it's clipped on a D-ring because it's secure, but you don't want unsecure things. Pockets on the side are the best. For those side mount divers, you might be considering pockets on the front of the legs. But even if you can't find the wetsuit that you want with pockets, you can buy external pockets that you can attach to your BCD or wear them over your wetsuit like shorts. And those work just as well. There's some popular ones that I've used in the past, and I'll link them in the description below to make it a little bit easier to see what I'm talking about. Okay, and let's talk about different form factors. For warm water, you have shorties, which are just like they sound. They have a cut here, here, and down to your knee. They cover your core, which is the most important, where most of your heat is, but they don't cover your appendages. These are generally for the warmer waters, and it's really just bare minimum protection. They can be a bit more comfortable, especially when it's warmer, but note the hidden and important benefit of suits is that environmental protection, or rather protecting you from the environment. Covering your skin also helps protect you from those tiny invisible things that sting, like jellyfish tentacles or those little planktons that can sting you. There's all sorts of things flying around the water that could sting you, and so sometimes it's just nice to cover up most of your skin and have the bare minimum exposed. For that reason, it's generally a good idea to cover up. But I do agree, it can feel quite liberating to be less covered. I have dove with just swimming trunks before, and I do know some divers, especially under 100th dive, like to go full nude. So it's a consideration, but it's obviously not necessarily dangerous. At worst, your skin's gonna look like hell and it's gonna be super itchy. As long as it's not like terrible jellyfish, like a man of war. You don't wanna touch those things. Also, another consideration, but maybe not as strong consideration as it should be sometimes, is what good is a wetsuit if it doesn't make you look badass? And by the way, kudos to you if you know where this design is from. Some European and American wetsuit brands are pretty basic design-wise. Like, look at this one. About as black and basic as can be. It's a, I'm not sure if it's European or American, but I can guarantee you it's one of them. Bland. I'm not so crazy about getting a special design, but I don't blame people for wanting to. And honestly, I will admit it's pretty boring. But bam, look at that. This looks so cool. So if you're looking to have something custom or more cool looking, you often have to look at the more Asian brands. Find something that fits your vibe and your body. And I hope to see a bit more competition in the arena for those American and European brands. And if that doesn't suit your fancy and you can't find something you like off the shelf, then you can have a custom design. So check this out. My wife, she can't find rentals easy. And so she really wanted a custom fitting wetsuit for her size, which worked out well. So she's getting a custom suit anyways, and so she actually made her own design. This is actually her design that she made, and she worked with a tailor that helped make this thing. And so if you're interested in finding out the company that she worked with, I'll link that down below too. It's not a sponsored link, I just think that they did a great job on this. And I get this question a lot, like, where did she get this suit? So I guess I finally revealed it. She got it custom made. And when you're working with them, you can send them the design that you want, and they'll tell you if they can make it or not, maybe some tweaks. And I will say the quality of this suit and how well it's turned out over the years is quite good. Just know that when you're getting a custom wetsuit done, it's a little more work than you probably would think. And so they're probably gonna not be local. If they're local, that's great, but they're probably gonna ship something to you. You're gonna have to measure everything on your body and probably need help measuring it. And you send those measurements in with your design. They will make a initial work of it, send it to you, and then you have to basically measure everything where it's loose and send back exactly how loose it is, and with it's kind of like a prototype version of it, send it back to them. Then they'll basically cut it down to exact fitting, send it back to you. You can make another round of tweaks if needed. And so it's kind of back and forth, and you will need help doing these measurements. I think it took us like 4 hours the first time. So it's an intensive process. So just be aware. Easier to get something off the shelf for sure. All right, and a tip for trying out wetsuits is to remember that they feel a little tighter on land. That slight squeeze in the shop often turns into a more perfect fit once you're underwater, and that neoprene relaxes a little bit. So test those 5 fit zones properly before you buy, because the only thing worse than freezing on a dive is freezing on a dive with no changing room in sight. Now that we've seen how good a fit helps keep the ocean outside of your wetsuit, let's dive into something equally important: materials, types, and thickness. Basically, those important details that secretly make or break your dive. Let's start with what might be the most misleading part of any wetsuit: those neat numbers from 3 millimeters, 5 millimeters, or 7 millimeters. They seem so straightforward. Oh, it's 73 Fahrenheit or 23 Celsius. I'll grab a 3 millimeter wetsuit. Nope, not so fast. Those numbers come with temperature ranges, sure, but they ignore all the real world factors that affect how cold or cozy you'll actually feel underwater. The standard rule of thumb guidelines are 2.5 millimeter or less for tropical 72 plus Fahrenheit or 22 plus Celsius. 3 to 4.5 millimeter for around 61 to 75 Fahrenheit or 16 to 22 Celsius. 5 to 6.5 millimeter for 50 to 64 Fahrenheit or 10 to 16 Celsius. And 7 millimeter plus for full-on cold 45 to 54 degree or 7 to 12 degrees Celsius. Consider diving in California. The chart might suggest a 5 millimeter suit, but many locals opt in for a 7 millimeter with a hood for comfort. Those guidelines assume a mythical average diver that really doesn't exist. And I will say that many divers have different comfort zones. Some divers just feel really hot easy, and some divers get really cold easy. So you have to find your own comfort zone. And I will say too, as a beginner diver, you're working a lot harder than more experienced divers who are very efficient with their movements. And so the more efficient you are, the less you're moving around and the colder you're gonna feel. You're gonna just feel like you're hardly moving at all, and so you're gonna get colder. With beginners, they're usually doing all sorts of stuff, and it's just a learning process before you get more efficient. And so you're probably gonna feel warmer easier. So sometimes you can check the tag on the inside of the suit. Sometimes, if you're lucky, it might have something like a thermal rating from D to A. A being the highest amount of insulation that it can give you on a dive. This is really more of an arbitrary guideline, but can be helpful. There really is no right or wrong here. But what is important is you'll need to experiment and have an appropriate amount of thickness for your comfort level. And pro tip, diving cold isn't just uncomfortable, it can increase your risk of decompression sickness because your body circulation slows. So yeah, comfort also equals safety. Another consideration is potentially how your dive profile is going to be, or rather where you're spending most of your time. The deeper, let's say at 100 feet or 30 meters, your 7 millimeter is going to compress more like a 5 millimeter, and it's going to feel a little colder. So if you're spending most of your dive down at that depth, it might be better to try and have something even more to keep yourself warm. Additionally, the longer you dive, it just allows your core temperature to drop lower. Your body's working hard to keep that core temperature high, and it's doing a great job, but if you're challenging it, eventually it's gonna run low on energy, and your core temperature is gonna drop really quickly due to that. It's gonna need a thicker wetsuit or potentially a dry suit. Just know also, on the opposite end, thicker doesn't always mean it's better as well. A full 7 millimeter plus 7 millimeter shorty combo, that's 14 millimeters, is gonna make you feel like the Michelin man trying to do yoga underwater. It's gonna be such an exhausting effort. I don't know anyone who enjoys that. And by the way, when you put a shorty above your 7 millimeter, it's generally called Farmer John's. So it's a 14 millimeter combo, and it's generally used in colder water. Farmer John's. Some divers use these like neoprene jackets that are basically pullovers that add an extra layer when it's cold as well. These add a little bit of warmth to the core by, again, slowing water permeation a bit more. But of course, it won't be as tight as your actual wetsuit that's next to your skin. And it's the same considerations with that. If you're buying a polar jacket or a Farmer John, you don't want it to be so baggy that it's harder for cold water to collect inside. And I mentioned it already, but there's also a type called semi-dry suits that tries to be extra thick with tighter seals around the neck, wrists, and the ankles. And you could rock that with a full hood. These are kind of for folks diving in cold water who don't want to commit to a dry suit. You can also try the Farmer John's as well. So it's either the semi-dry or the Farmer John's for colder water. I don't like them myself, but they're options if you don't want to commit to a dry suit, which is more expensive and it's this whole other beast, which I'm going to make videos on dry suits as well, so stay tuned to that if you're interested in dry suit. The semi-dries can be quite a challenge to put on. The one nice thing about semi-dries is they have the durability and the capability of a wetsuit, and so they're a little bit easier to put on. They might be easier if going for a dive in cold water and not ready to commit to a dry suit yet. And please don't grab a surfing wetsuit for diving. As stylish as some of them are, and they certainly look similar in appearance, they're engineered differently. Diving suits focus on thermal retention under pressure with strategic sealing, while surfing wetsuits prioritize flexibility. And speaking of materials, neoprene comes in all kinds of flavor. There's the regular neoprene, which is kind of what this is. It's the standard. And then there's the super stretch, which you can kind of see here on the back. It's more flexible, but also easier to break. And there's also compressed, which is generally better insulation in deeper dives because it'll become less cold as you go deeper. And there's another fancy one that I've read about called Ulix, which is a fancy plant-based stuff for the eco-conscious wetsuits. And you might have also heard some people talk about open cell versus closed cell. Essentially, a closed cell means neoprene has an inner lining to make it more comfortable and potentially easier to put on. So you can see here, inner lining. You can see it's a fabric and it's soft, feels nice. However, open cells don't have that inner lining and can potentially keep you a touch warmer. They're often favored by free divers and are rarer for scuba diving market. The trickiest part with these suits is that you need to basically lube yourself up and then squeeze yourself into them. They're really hard to get on and off. And so honestly, that's where the appeal loses it for me. But where the benefits might be is if you're a free diver and you want to use it for scuba diving and save yourself of buying 2 suits, that might be an option. Some people swear that they're a little bit warmer as well. And it's likely a little bit more flexible as well. And to boot, kind of like the surfing suits, they tend to be a little bit more stylish. The manufacturers for the suits tend to make them look a lot more cool than scuba diving suits. I don't know why we don't have that many cool looking scuba diving suits. Scuba diving suits are often black with maybe a dash of color here and there to make it slightly distinct. Anyways, maybe I'm wishful thinking. You'll also come across all sorts of fancy sounding materials. Meshes, high-tech fabric weaves, neoprene alternatives like thermocline, shark skin, and lava core. Kind of proprietary fabrics that certain companies own. It's like a wetsuit version of a sci-fi movie. More of these are popping up every year, and while none so far have beat the classic neoprene in raw warmth, they do offer interesting trade-offs like lighter weight, easier movement, or less neoprene smell in your car. And who knows, maybe we're just years or just moments away from some new material that is going to crush neoprene and probably make most of this video irrelevant. So I'm hoping it's going to be a little timeless, so we'll see how long that goes. But just be ready for some sticker shock because custom proprietary materials are often also not cheap. At the end of the day, the ideal wetsuit isn't determined by temperature charts alone, but by combining your metabolism, dive profile, water conditions, activity level, and match your selection to your specific needs, not just the numbers on the tag. All right, so you found your perfect wetsuit. Congrats. But before you ride off into the ocean sunset, let's talk about something that can make or break your suit's lifespan, how you can take care of it. First up, let's consider the stitching of those suits. Those threads are important. So you've got overlock stitching, and I'll try to show some images here because I probably can't identify them all in the suit. So I'm gonna show some stills while I'm talking to give you an idea. So first up, we have overlock stitching, which tends to be the cheapest and the least durable. And you have flat lock stitching, which tends to be more breathable and ideal for warmer water. Then you have blind stitching that has to be the tightest threading making it the least breathable, but also the most ideal for warmth. And then we have seam. Seam construction significantly affects both warmth and durability. Sealed suits that are glued and taped will have minimal water seepage, superior insulation, and a higher price. Unsealed suits have basic stitching, are more affordable, allow water movement, and reduce thermal efficiency. The colder the dive, these small little details matter more. For warm water, you'll be probably pretty happy in some basic 3mm suits or a shorty. But honestly, the real damage usually happens after the dive. Hot water rinse? Big no-no. It'll wreck neoprene. Water washing? Dryer? That's wetsuit abuse. Instead, rinse thoroughly with cool, fresh water immediately after diving to remove salt, sand, and potentially chlorine from a pool that deteriorate the material. And you might be thinking, hey, my wetsuit doesn't have any metal on it, so I don't need to worry about oxidation of any kind. But here's the gotcha. That salt water over time will start to dry up and crystallize and poke small little holes in the fabric of your suit that will help it deteriorate over time. So maybe a quick cool water rinse after your dives. And another pro tip is usually once a year you can fill up your tub with some cool water and throw some stearamine in there and let these sit in that tub with the stearamine, and it'll help clean off the suit with any bacteria that's on it. And another tip, as I mentioned before, for long-term maintenance is paying special attention to that zipper. It's one of the biggest failure points on your suit. Never try to force it, as I mentioned. And if it feels like it's getting harder to zip and unzip, there is special zipper wax that you can apply and then zip it a few times to lubricate the zipper and keep it going. Just make sure that the lubricant doesn't bunch up anywhere, because that will attract like a little piece of dirt to stick to your teeth, and that could be a hazard when you try to zip or unzip it. So you kind of just want it to be shiny, but not any obvious lube that's there to attract dirt if it touches it. Generally, a pro tip is just to apply a little bit at the end of the zipper here, or just underneath the zipper, and just zip it up and down to spread it across the zipper. And lube is generally more important on metal zippers, which you might find on some semi-dries or some thicker wetsuits. But generally, plastic is the preferred for warmer wetsuits, but they could still need some lube as well to make it easier to zip. When storing your wetsuit, use a wide plastic or wooden hanger to prevent creasing. The key is to make it wide so that it's not a small little plastic that's digging in and creating some strange and sharp creases in the material. If folding is necessary, do so gently with the zipper on top to avoid stress points. Keep it out of direct sunlight, which will degrade the material over time. And avoid creasing the zipper at all costs. Inspect your wetsuit for tears or rough spots. If you do need to patch your wetsuit, you can usually do it yourself by fixing these areas with neoprene cement or patches that can be applied to the surface to patch up the material. And one more pro tip that will sound a bit unconventional is to get some nylon-like material, which will make it considerably easier to put it on your legs. A lot of divers, especially well-fitted wetsuits, could find it quite hard to get on and off the wetsuit, especially when wet. And so a nylon stocking, it might feel a little weird for men, but it's an option, and it makes it easier to put on your wetsuit. At the end of the day, the difference between a dreamy dive and a shivering struggle often comes down to that thermal comfort. Research confirms properly fitted wetsuits significantly enhance safety and satisfaction underwater. The perfect wetsuit isn't about price, it's about matching your diving environment to your body shape. And by the way, if you enjoyed this video, I have another one that goes over the same considerations in detail on BCDs, so you can just be just as informed there. Check it out here. The more you know, the more you'll love and protect the ocean. Until next time.